Hello, I'm Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for The Verdict.
As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers. This program is co-sponsored by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. This is a show where we discuss topical issues, specifically legal issues of broad interest. And let me introduce one of Oklahoma's top legal experts and my co-host, Kent Myers.
Mick, glad to see you again. Glad to be back with you again on another show. I want to apologize to you for not last week referring to you as the Honorable Mick Cornett. Congratulations on your election to Ward 1 City Council.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to take that position.
You'll serve the city well. I thought it was interesting that you won by the greatest majority that any newly elected councilman has won by, I guess, in the history of the city.
Well, yeah, against an incumbent. Yeah,
against an incumbent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
I'll try to be more deferential. I want to start out by referring to a call I got after our first show on Should Terry Nichols Be Retried in Oklahoma. I had a call from a woman whose name is Mary in Harrison, Arkansas, and she took me to task saying, Kent, you didn't at the end of the show tell us what the answer to the question is.
She wanted the verdict.
She wanted the verdict. I said, Mary, we tried to present both sides of the question and let you decide what the verdict is. And that's what we're going to try to do today and in our subsequent shows.
Well, you picked a great topic for today's show, death penalty or capital punishment, really interchangeable.
Yeah. Death penalty is always in the news. Oklahoma has executed 10 individuals since the beginning of 2001 in the first quarter. We know that Tim McVeigh's execution is coming up May 16th for the Oklahoma City bombing conviction. It's hardly a week goes by that we don't see a show about somebody being taken off death row because of a mistake having been made through subsequent DNA evidence proof. And the death penalty, Mick, is something that most people have a very strong opinion about. There are very few people say, I don't know, when they're asked that question.
Well, and I think that's a good point, because I think what we struggle with maybe is not necessarily the answers, but we can't even agree on the questions that should be asked. Yeah. It's an emotional issue. It's the death penalty. Should be a lively discussion right here on The Verdict.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an Allied artist.
Traumatic events affect people in different ways. Months, even years later, some trauma survivors may develop post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. They may feel emotionally empty, have trouble sleeping or concentrating, or suffer recurring memories of the trauma. But there is hope for recovery. PTSD is treatable. For more information, call the PTSD Alliance at 1-877-507-PTSD.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children. Over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers donating their time to represent children. Call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages, and for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and we're ready to discuss the death penalty. Kent, why don't you introduce our guests?
Thanks, Mick. We are really pleased today to have two of the leading experts on this subject with us. To my left is the Honorable Drew Edmonson, the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma. Drew's been a district attorney down in the trenches trying cases in Muskogee County for 10 years. He's been our Attorney General since 1994. Drew, really glad to have you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
On my right is Professor Randy Coyne, a colleague of mine at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. Randy is one of our best experts on the death penalty. He has co-authored a case book on the death penalty. He is the chairman of the American Bar Association, co-chairman of the American Bar Association Committee on the Death Penalty, and he was on Timothy McVeigh's trial team. Glad to have you, Randy.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, let me start out, throw out kind of a fundamental question. Drew, I'd like to start with you. Why do we have capital punishment at all? What are the purposes?
Well, there are a variety of purposes for any form of punishment ascribed by sociologists. I have never argued that the death penalty is a general deterrent to violent crime or even a general deterrent to murder. I have argued that the death penalty is a specific deterrent under some circumstances. If the most a person can get is life without parole and is committing an armed robbery after a number of prior convictions, there's very little incentive to keep any witnesses alive. If he doesn't get any more time for killing the witnesses, then he might as well go ahead and kill them. Also, if he's in prison serving life without parole, and that's the most punishment he can possibly receive, there's very little to protect other prisoners, guards, people who work in the medical facilities of the prison, visitors to the prison, or if he escapes, other people might be killed. He serves no more punishment for the deaths. And finally, the person who is executed will never kill again, and it's a specific deterrent to that person from committing other acts of violence in the future.
So there's some deterrent factor and some protection for society.
Yeah, predominantly, it's society exercising its right to self-defense.
Okay. Randy?
I think our thinking on the death penalty has changed over time. It used to be you'd read Supreme Court opinions saying that the death penalty is necessary as a general deterrent, that it would prevent others tempted to kill from killing if they knew they might face the death penalty, and also that it serves as an adequate retribution for victims and for the state and society that's been harmed by the crimes of vicious murderers. But these days the thinking's changed, and fewer justices are standing by deterrence as a adequate justification for the death penalty. I like to teach my students an example where death penalty might actually be an incentive to crime. Let's say someone goes in to rob a liquor store and the proprietor reaches for his wallet or for a cigarette or for a gun, and the robber shoots and kills the proprietor. In a state with the death penalty, I can imagine that robber thinking, oh my God, I'm now a murderer during the course of a robbery. I can be put to death. I'd better kill those witnesses. So the thinking of deterrence has changed, and I think it's important to note that people who commit these types of crimes aren't rational people with to kill or not to kill written on a legal pad. They're people who kill in the heat of passion, under extreme emotional disturbance, mental disabilities, and I'm really glad that the Attorney General and I agree with respect to that issue of general deterrence.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I hear, and we've got a graphic about it I'd like to show now. I hear that the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution has something to do with the death penalty. Drew, can you address the 8th Amendment and what its relevance is?
Well, the 8th Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment as well as excessive fines. The courts have ruled that the death penalty cannot per se be cruel and unusual punishment because we also provide in the 5th and 14th Amendments that you can't deprive someone of life without due process of law. And so by extension of that, with due process of law, you can deprive someone of life. So those two amendments cannot be in conflict with each other. That is not to say that some forms of execution might constitute cruel and unusual punishment. I think the court was about to say that about Florida's electric chair when Florida finally backed up and adopted lethal injection.
Well, Drew, let me ask you to comment on, then I want Randy to. Capital punishment stopped in this country in 1972. Why?
The court handed down a Furman case in 1972, which basically in a 5-4 decision said that across the states the evidence was that the death penalty was being utilized in an arbitrary and capricious manner.
So that it's cruel and unusual?
They said it was a denial of equal protection. I don't know if they said it was also cruel and unusual. That they struck down the death penalty in every state that had it in 1972. We then grappled with ways that we could channel the death penalty to make it less arbitrary, less capricious, and that resulted in the adoption of new statutes. Some states went in the direction of saying, okay, instead of being arbitrary, if you get convicted of first-degree murder, you're executed, period. Those were ultimately knocked down. The other states, and ultimately Oklahoma, adopted the other form, which is saying we're going to have a bifurcated 2-stage procedure. First, you have to be convicted of first-degree murder. Second, the state must allege and prove beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of one or more aggravating circumstances. And only if those aggravating circumstances exist will that murder then be eligible for the death penalty.
Well, give an example or two, Randy, of what an aggravating circumstance might be.
Well, in Oklahoma, an aggravating circumstance might be that someone is a future danger, that someone poses a continuing threat to society, that unless this person is put to death, there's a very high risk that the person would go on to commit other violent offenses. Another aggravator which has become troublesome in Oklahoma is that of a killing which is especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. The Supreme Court years ago said that those words didn't provide the guidance that the Attorney General said was required, and there's been some movement to limit that aggravating factor to mean homicides in which the victim is tortured or homicide in which there is a sort of extreme brutality.
Drew, in just a few seconds, tell us what kind of extra protections, if any, are afforded to a person facing the death penalty.
Well, we have a system providing for indigent defense in all 77 counties. We have an extra element in a capital case. There is a state-funded capital defense system that's available to go into any of the 77 counties at state expense and provide the defense in a case where the state is going to ask for the death penalty. In addition to that, by constitutional rule, the first appeal of right must be funded at state expense. So once the conviction and the death penalty is obtained, a person can appeal all the way to the United States Supreme Court at the expense of the taxpayers. And then over the years, as a result, usually of convictions being reversed, we have adopted, as a result of the Ake decision, for instance, broadened availability of expert witnesses. We have adopted criminal discovery codes as a result of cases being reversed because the prosecution withheld potentially exculpatory material. So either by statute or case law, we have provided additional protections for people charged with that very most serious offense.
Let me interject right here. We got to run to a break. We're going to hold those thoughts, get to a short break. We're discussing the death penalty. What's your verdict?
Scream at our concerts knew what a dork I was in high school. Nerdy. So, and I think that could have pushed me to think, oh, well, I better do what the cool kids are doing.
But there's pressures at every angle to take drugs. I really feel that having a creative outlet is the only thing that pulls you out of that and makes you make the right decision.
It's the hardest time in your life.
But that's when you're discovering what you love to do, what you're talented at. I can't imagine doing that with something hanging over my head like drugs.
Liz was 4 when she learned how to wash herself. But some mornings she's so weak, her daughter Jenny has to do it for her. Liz has multiple sclerosis, an unpredictable neurological disease that strikes young adults, many with children. The National MS Society helps families learn to live with MS. They count on us. Can we count on you?
Oklahoma's business leaders are bringing the arts back to school with Arts Power, because arts education is critical to developing young minds, which makes it critical to Oklahoma's future. Yet the arts have all but disappeared from our classrooms. Help bring the arts back to school so education is complete, so the workforce of our future can compete.
We're discussing the death penalty. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent, where are we here?
Well, I'd like to see what other states do. We know Oklahoma has the death penalty. Let's pull up a graphic that does show the death penalty states in yellow and the non-death penalty states in white. Randy, do you have any comments about why those states are clustered the way they are?
Well, the death penalty has always been a favorite of southern states, and I think it probably derives as much from the old slave codes in which black people could automatically be put to death for assaulting white people, raping white women, and things of that sort. What's interesting to me about the graphic is you have states like Connecticut with the death penalty with higher homicide rates than their neighboring states, Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Virginia has the death penalty, very vigorous in its enforcement. West Virginia has a 30% lower homicide rate. North Dakota, a state with the death penalty, has a higher homicide rate than South Dakota, a state without it.
Well, let me change the subject just a minute. Drew, do we have mistakes on death row in Oklahoma? Are there people on death row in Oklahoma that are innocent?
Well, there are cases that are still working their way through the appellate process. You know, there are cases that are a year old that we won't know for several years whether there were errors committed during the trial that require reversals. I feel confident that of those who have been executed since 1976, we have not made a mistake. I feel confident of those who are approaching and nearing execution that we have not made a mistake. As we've been actively involved in the appeals on those cases. But certainly there are mistakes made at the trial level, there are errors made, and there are cases that need to be reversed. That happens, and they do get reversed.
Yeah. Randy?
I wish I could share the Attorney General's confidence. There's no way of knowing, I suppose, whether we've actually executed an innocent person, but I've, since coming to Oklahoma in 1990, had occasion to meet 4 people who Oklahoma sentenced to death who gained their freedom, oftentimes through DNA testing, I think 2 of them, other times through more reliable trial testimony, sometimes on the basis of the lousy job their defense lawyer did, or misconduct by either the prosecutor or the police department's office, and not sharing that information that there's a duty to share in a capital case. Even the Supreme Court, several justices, typically as they near retirement, have come to the conclusion that, yes, we probably have executed innocent people. A study done showed 23 or so executed up to 1975.
Randy, what are the biblical implications of the death penalty? Because we get a lot of our laws, and specifically the death penalty, I think a lot of those thoughts come from the Bible. From a Christian sense, where are we here?
Well, the Old Testament was sort of a great capital code. You could be put to death and stoned or impaled for cursing a parent, or misbranding pottery that you were making, or fraudulently representing the quality of alcohol in your beer. It's interesting, the Attorney General and I were talking about the reinstatement of the death penalty in New York. There was a senator that wanted the death penalty back on the books some years ago, and he approached Governor Carey and said, where would Christianity be if Jesus got 8 to 15 years with time off for good behavior? And Governor Carey said, well, if the senator can get resurrection into his bill, I might consider signing it. Since then, of course, New York has adopted the death penalty.
Let me ask you both this. Let's pull up a graphic on something Voltaire said. about the time I started practicing law, 1747, and I think he was facing the death penalty at the time, but he says, it is better to risk saving a guilty person than to condemn an innocent one. Drew, what do you think?
I would not argue with Voltaire. I agree with that, and I think we've codified that. That's why we bend over backwards. You know, those who are in civil practice know that the burden of proof is preponderance of the evidence. Sometimes you have to even get a little higher than that, but in a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's why we fund the appeals process. That's why we fund experts. Because we agree with Voltaire that we don't want, particularly when you're talking about death penalty, to execute an innocent person. And if I could respond just very briefly to the study that Professor Coyne mentioned about the 23 people, that study was itself studied by 2 Justice Department lawyers who concluded that the original study was based predominantly on what the defense attorneys were saying about their clients, that when they went back and looked at the transcripts, they found none, particularly since 1950, who had ever been demonstrably innocent after having been executed. It simply hasn't happened in the modern era.
Well, of course, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, I suppose, and they can be argued by both sides, but it seems to me that until we can agree upon the infallibility of human judgment, we've got to agree that there are awful mistakes made on each level, whether the defense attorneys, judges, prosecutors, police officers, and that human error being inevitable, mistakes are going to be made, and sometimes they're going to cost the lives of innocent people.
Yeah. Drew, who can be executed? Can the insane be executed? Can the mentally retarded be executed? Can children be executed? Who can be executed?
No, there are probably a whole list we could go through, but just to name a few. The murderer must have been at the age of 16 or over at the time of the homicide, must be competent and must be sane, not only at the time of the offense, but also at the time of the execution. So someone could be both competent and sane at the time of the murder, but if during their period of incarceration they become either incompetent or insane, then they can't be executed.
What about those who don't want to die, or those who do want to die, excuse me? Timothy McVeigh apparently has instructed lawyers not to prosecute his appeal any farther, and he's scheduled to be executed May 16th. What about those people?
We're seeing an increase in the number of volunteers, those who could buy more time simply by litigating, by telling their lawyers to go forward and fight for their very lives. And that should tell us something that I believe to be true about our prison system, and that is that inmates sitting in prison are suffering. They're paying a price. They're being punished. To elect to die rather than to fight for your very life, even in a prison cell, tells me that the conditions in prison aren't as comfortable as we think they might be.
Are you saying that life without parole, then, is cruel and unusual?
I don't believe life without parole is cruel and unusual punishment, but I think for many murderers, life without parole is a more punitive, more harsh sentence than a death sentence. And that's one of the reasons I oppose the death penalty, is I'm not sure if that inmate will be forgiven and shoot straight to heaven, but I know when he's in his cell, he's going to be suffering.
Drew, I'll give you a final word, 10 seconds.
McVeigh went through his entire direct appeal before he decided to waive the federal portion of his appeals. So his case had already been reviewed all the way up to the United States Supreme Court.
All right. Kent? I love having these guests here. This is outstanding.
Well, thank you guys for coming very much. I know you had busy things to do, and we appreciate you joining us for this segment of The Verdict.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll have the final thoughts when we return. You're watching The Verdict with Kent Myers and Mick Cornett.
Did you know that in Oklahoma there is a shortage of child care providers for infants and toddlers? Consider working in child care.
Opening daycare was the best thing that I ever done because I get to stay at home with my children and make a living. To me, when they're coming in upset or sad and me as a provider can make them happy, to me that makes my day.
I was busy raising my 4 children and I often felt, how can I help, with our family income? So I turned to home daycare. I'm very happy in doing my job. It's the light of my life.
You will be rewarded more than the money that you get. You'll be making a difference. It's wonderful. It's just memories for the heart that you can't get anywhere else.
If you have a special place in your heart for children, there is a real need for infant and toddler caregivers in our state.
Choose a career in child care.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an allied artist.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children. Over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers donating their time to represent children. Call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Ken, I did a little research here. Thought this was interesting. 5 nations, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Congo, and the United States conduct 85% of the world's executions. I think it's interesting who we're aligned with in this issue.
That is interesting. Well, the death penalty is a topic that never becomes stale. It's something that was being talked about when I was in law school a long time ago. It's something that's on the front page of the newspaper today. There are really valid arguments both sides on whether we ought to have it or not. It seems to me the closer to the crime you are, the more strongly you may feel about the death penalty. But what we've tried to do today are give you a guest that would present both sides on whether we ought to have it or not, and I thought they just did a grand job.
And we got some really good shows coming up. Let me again thank our guest, Oklahoma Attorney General Drew Edmonson and OU Law Professor Randy Coyne. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation, and also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children.